What happens when the people trusted to shape America's economy can't even answer the most basic question about poverty? In a heated hearing, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was asked point-blank if he knew the nation's poverty rate. His hesitant stumble didn't just reveal uncertainty, it exposed something deeper, a glaring disconnect between the polished world of policy talk and the harsh realities millions of families face every single day. While Washington obsesses over tax cuts and Wall Street gains, everyday Americans are forced to make impossible choices just to survive.
A woman from Texas, Ms. Garcia, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the Secretary for being with us today. I want to start first by just clarifying your testimony and its delivery. Why did you ask for your witness statement to be embargoed until this morning?
Sorry, pardon me?
Your testimony reads right at the very top, embargoed until delivery, which means that we didn't follow the usual practice of this committee of getting the testimony 24 hours in advance so that committee members can review it and prepare for questions. Yours was posted at 10:01. The committee was at 10. Well, it looks like you need...
My staff is just telling me that it's standard practice.
It's your standard practice? It's not our standard practice as a committee.
I'm told that it was standard practice.
Okay, you were told by whom, sir?
So my comms team and legislative affairs team working with the committee.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think for the record, I think you should clarify to the gentleman that that is not our standard. And I know that at least I didn't know anything about this until I got it here, and I don't think our committee staff on the Democratic side was notified that we would be getting all your testimony late. I just wondered, why you had made that request, and clearly at the top, embargoed until delivery.
Well, embargo to delivery, I think that was mostly meant for the press.
We're not press, sir. We're the members of Congress that have oversight. So, Mr. Chairman, I would hope that you not condone this kind of late submission. It just doesn't help, frankly, for some of the atmosphere that's created when we all just sit down and we still don't have your testimony. Well, then, we just sort of don't feel really good about that. It's not our custom and practice.
Congresswoman, I appreciate the importance that you put on my statement.
Well, thank you. Notice it's important, sir. Do you know what the poverty rate is in our country?
I believe that the poverty level is a fixed number.
No, do you know the poverty rate in this country?
I believe it is in the teens.
In the teens, okay. Well, it's about a little over 11%. It just strikes me that most of all of your testimony is always about the tax cuts and cutting costs, and it's always about tax cuts, and it's always about the rich. But nothing is ever said about poor, other than you suggesting that you worked yourself
No, ma'am.
college.
No tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime.
Sir, I read your testimony. That's not anywhere in here.
Deductibility.
That is not in here, sir.
Deductibility
I am
of
referring
auto
to your
loans.
testimony and what I've listened to. I said right up front, I can see you and I can hear you. You've not said one thing about what we're doing to help the poor. In fact,
none of your colleagues
even when we
have
were
asked me.
talking, even when we were talking about the car seats, that impacts poor people more than anyone else, because not only can they usually not even afford a car seat and have to go to a garage sale to find one, now it's going to be even higher. Your president is suggesting that he wants to give a $5,000 bonus to women to have babies, and then what? Just leave them out on the cold alone? No car seat, no food, no Medicaid, no chip
Congresswoman,
program?
I can tell you the worst.
And I'm asking you right now, sir.
The
that
worst thing
you
for
need-
working
you need
families
to-
will be
as a
the
treasurer-
expiration of the 2017
As Secretary of Treasurer,
Tax
it's not
Cuts and
just
Job
about
Act.
the inflation rate. It's not just about the GDP. It's also about making sure that we keep the poverty rate in this country low. There are people who are living in poverty that never have lived in poverty before. You also failed to say here, you say unemployment remains low. I mean, the study should have read unemployment went up.
Ma'am,
Because it did.
Under the Biden
And
administration,
the growth
we
administration, we're not talking
experienced
about Biden, sir. We're
record
talking
food bank
about your
usage.
testimony here
Record food
today
bank usage.
about the current president and his plans. Because I can tell you, I'm from Houston. I'm concerned too about some of the tariffs on energy. You know, we have done a lot to increase trade in Houston, construction, everything after the pandemic. And all things were growing. Everything has been growing. But now that the Trump tariffs have surfaced, it is threatening Houston's economy. I represent the area where almost the entire ship channel is in. The petrochemical companies all are in my district. The port is in my district. Everybody is trying to figure out
Gentlewoman's
what the
time has
hell we're going to
expired.
do.
Mr. Chairman,
Ranking member.
I ask unanimous consent to enter.
And in this moment, Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia wasn't just asking for a number, she was demanding accountability for millions who are too often ignored. From the very start of this hearing, Garcia set the tone. Before Bessent even had a chance to get comfortable, she called out the way his testimony had been delivered. Unlike the usual practice where members of Congress get testimony 24 hours in advance to review and prepare, his statement was embargoed until the very moment the hearing began. It might sound like a minor technicality, but Garcia knew exactly what it meant. Delivering testimony at the last second tilts the playing field, leaving legislators without enough time to dig into the details and craft tough, targeted questions. That imbalance gives officials the upper hand, allowing them to shape the narrative and avoid deeper accountability. By refusing to let this slide, Garcia was sending a clear message: transparency matters and so does fairness. If you're testifying before Congress, you don't get to game the system. But if that early exchange seemed sharp, it was only the prelude. The real confrontation arrived when Garcia asked what should have been the simplest question of the day: do you know the poverty rate in this country? It's the kind of number you would expect any Treasury Secretary to have at the ready, especially when poverty is the reality for tens of millions of Americans. But Bessent froze. He fumbled through his response, muttering that he thought it was in the teens. It was a vague, imprecise, and ultimately telling answer. Garcia quickly corrected him. The actual poverty rate sits just over 11%, and while some might shrug at that number as low, she drove home the human cost. 11% of the U.S. population equals more than 37 million people. That's not just a statistic. That's millions of families trying to survive paycheck to paycheck, struggling with food insecurity, housing instability, and medical debt. In that moment, the gap between Bessent's shaky grasp of the number and the reality on the ground couldn't have been more clear. Garcia's frustration wasn't just about his lack of precision, it was about the larger pattern. She pointed out that Bessent's testimony, like so many economic policy discussions in Washington, centered on tax cuts, deregulation, and policies designed to benefit the wealthy and well-connected. What she didn't hear was any real plan for addressing poverty. Nothing about lifting up families who can't afford basic necessities. Nothing about the workers who make just enough to scrape by but never enough to build stability. Nothing about those who fall through the cracks of programs meant to help. It was the absence of these voices, the silence on these struggles, that struck her most. And then she gave an example that hit close to home for countless parents, something as basic as a car seat. For middle-class families, a car seat is a standard purchase, maybe an inconvenience but affordable. For poor families, it can be a crushing expense. Some parents are forced to buy second-hand car seats from garage sales because they can't afford new ones, even when safety regulations change. That's the reality Garcia was pointing to. When leaders focus only on tax breaks for the rich and ignore the actual cost of living for working families, they leave millions behind. A car seat might seem small in the grand scheme of economic policy, but for a struggling parent, it's the difference between security and vulnerability. The confrontation didn't stop there. Garcia pressed further, highlighting the dangerous gap between abstract economic indicators and the lived experiences of ordinary people. Yes, the unemployment rate might look healthy on paper, but what about those who are employed and still living below the poverty line? What about families who for the first time slipped into poverty due to rising costs of housing, groceries, and health care? What about the millions working full-time jobs that don't pay a living wage? Garcia reminded the hearing that economic health cannot be measured only by GDP growth or by Wall Street profits. It must be measured by whether people can actually live with dignity, afford their bills, and take care of their children. She also zeroed in on a policy proposal that perfectly captured the disconnect: the so-called $5,000 baby bonus. On paper it sounds generous, an incentive for women to have children, with a one-time cash payment. But Garcia asked the question that cut through the shiny headline: what happens after the baby is born? A check doesn't pay for years of childcare. It doesn't cover hospital bills, rent, food, or the rising costs of housing. Without real support structures, Medicaid, affordable childcare, paid family leave, that bonus is little more than a temporary patch over a permanent problem. Garcia exposed the hollowness of policies that look good in a press release but fail to address the real challenges families face once the cameras are gone. Garcia's approach wasn't just about abstract national debates. She brought it home to her district in Houston. She pointed out that trade policies, tariffs, and economic shocks directly impact her constituents. Houston's shipping industry, its massive petrochemical plants, and the workers who power the port all live with the immediate consequences of national economic decisions. Tariffs might look like a line item in Washington, but in Houston they mean layoffs, higher prices, and shrinking opportunities. By grounding the conversation in her district, Garcia reminded everyone that these debates aren't just political theater. They have direct, often devastating consequences on real communities. And that leads us to the larger truth this hearing revealed. Economic policy is never just about charts, numbers, or indicators. It's about people. It's about the single mother working 2 jobs but still unable to afford reliable childcare. It's about the elderly couple deciding whether to pay rent or fill a prescription. It's about the child falling behind in school because their family can't afford stable housing or nutritious meals. When leaders like Bessent can't even name the poverty rate, it shows more than ignorance. It shows a dangerous detachment from the very people their decisions are supposed to serve. That's why this clash between Garcia and Bessent mattered so much. It wasn't just a test of knowledge, and it wasn't just about one statistic. It was about whether the nation's top economic officials understand, or even care, about the struggles of millions of Americans living in poverty. Garcia forced the issue onto the table. She made it clear that poverty cannot remain invisible in these debates, overshadowed by talk of tax breaks and market growth. She demanded recognition, not just for the wealthy who dominate policy conversations, but for the everyday Americans who are too often forgotten. And as the hearing wrapped, one thing became clear: poverty isn't just an uncomfortable statistic tucked away in reports, it's a lived reality. And when leaders fail to even speak to that reality, they fail in their duty to the people they serve. Garcia's persistence turned what could have been another dry, scripted hearing into a moment of reckoning. A moment where the gap between the halls of power and the struggles of ordinary Americans was laid bare. If you found this breakdown valuable and believe that conversations about poverty and economic justice deserve more attention, don't just click away. Share this video so more people understand what's at stake. Subscribe for deeper analysis on hearings that shape our future, and leave your thoughts in the comments. After all, democracy works best when the voices of everyday people, not just the wealthy, are heard.